Good afternoon, my local drones. This is Bio Gundam, and I am back again for another review of the modern day anime classic Yosuga no Sora. So my first impressions while going to the show is that, okay, it's another porn game adaptation. I should really stop watching shows like this. But I'm going to add that I really like this anime, and it's very hard to review an anime with this much controversy surrounding it, but I'll try my best to review it. And if you don't know why Yosuga no Sora is such a controversial topic, well, you're in for a real treat, my local drones, because I'm about to explain to you why right now. So let's move on to the story. Our story begins with our two main characters, Haruka and his twin sister Sora, who have decided to move to a rural town that they once spent the summers as kids with their now currently deceased grandfather, because just recently their parents have died in a tragic accident, and they've decided to move to this rural town to get a fresh start on life. And also because Sora has Sora has some sort of sickness and she can't go out very much, so they figured the countryside air would be good for her. And as they move into their old house or old stomping grounds, they meet old friends and shit happens, and the typical slice of life shit. It's pretty much like most rom-com anime. It's based around a high school in a small town. There's some girls that like the main protagonist for God knows reasons, and there's romance and harem and that kind of shit. So probably judging from what I've said so far, you probably think that the show is generic, and the show is generic in a way, but I'd like to add that Yosuga no Sora does do something a little different from what most rom-com normally do. Whether you think this is a good thing or not is really up to you. Me personally, I think it is a good thing, but at the same time, because of what it does so differently, it left quite the controversial opinion of lots of anime fans. Now, there are a few things the show does do a bit differently, which I'm going to mention right now. One thing is the narrative of the show. Now, for most hentai game or porn game adaptations, they will usually adapt one of the routes from the game with parts of the other routes kind of mixed in between, having this weird blend. And pretty much what the show does follow is pretty much a Groundhog Day formula and goes through all the girls' routes. Pretty much what happens is the main character goes through this girl's route, and after that route finishes, time reset, and next girl, time reset, move on, and then that's pretty much the show. What I really liked about this approach is that I was able to see all these routes play out as they were, and I got to see all the characters in a different light in each of the different routes. I also got a bit of drama with each route surrounding each of the girls that was the main character of that particular route. Even though the drama was generic at times and the routes have pretty much the same plot beat, I still like it. By the way, the plot beat is basically main character meets the girl, she has problems, then the problem is solved by the main character's penis, and then they fuck. That's pretty much the plot. Now, even though it does boil down to that, the only routes that I personally thought were interesting was the Now route or the Sora route. These were the only routes that did something that was actually serious and interesting, and they took themselves seriously enough, even though there are certain elements and portrayals I'm gonna bitch about later on, but we'll get to that later. Another thing the show does a little differently is the fact that it has a lot of not safe for work scenes that pretty much go into softcore porn territory. And if you think I'm joking, I'm not. I'm very serious. This show has sex scenes in it. Obviously censored sex scenes, because obviously not going to show the action. It's just kind of like the outlines and you see tits. And if you've watched hentai, then I'm pretty sure you know what to expect. Now, when I first watched the show, I was a little shocked at first because I had seen anything like this before, and I didn't really expect it from an anime like this. I mean, this showed on public television in Japan, although I guess being Japan, I guess they just don't give a fuck. But at the same time, when I think about it in retrospect, I don't really mind, because at least they're staying true to the source material, which for all intents and purposes is a porn game, if we're being completely honest about it. And when talking about the when talking about my thoughts on the sex scenes themselves and whether I think they're fan service or fit the context of the show, I would say the sex scenes of the show, because these are teenagers who are in, well, I'm not going to say love, because that's too a strong word. They're more like teenagers that liked each other and childhood friends or knew each other, and they kind of got close together and they liked each other and they kind of fucked around. And that's usually what most teenagers do. I mean, granted, the sex scenes themselves are portrayed pretty erotically, but it does actually fit the show. I mean, it makes sense, because if you're a teenager, there's a girl you like, you start filling around and eventually you fuck. I mean, that's kind of how teenagers learn how to approach mature relationships and romance and all that feels crap. But I will add there is actual like fan service in this scene. Like there are scenes where there are like girls like kind of touching each other and it looks really erotic, and there's other scenes where like, you know, basically there's water over them and you can see their bra and shit. So the sex scenes are kind of fan servicey, but they fix the context of the show, and there's like other fan service shit in between if you don't like the scenes. Also, one thing I'd like to add is that the story can be very controversial at times of how it handles its subject matter. For example, in one of the routes, the main character goes into a relationship with his twin sister, and there's also a part in the show in one of the routes where it was revealed that the main character was raped as a child by one of the main heroines, which at this point I am thinking to myself, what the fuck? Holy shit. And I can really see why people would find this very off-putting. Now, as for me personally, I didn't really care, but to be honest, I was kind of on the fence about the whole rape and incest plot point, which I'm going to dive into right now, my thoughts about that. Now, the thing about the incest thing is that I'm not exactly like bothered by the fact there was incest in it, because like it handled that idea maturely and responsibly, and it also said that like, hey, if you go around trying to fuck your relative, you know, people aren't gonna like that and you're gonna suffer the consequences about that. And that's just what I liked it about that. But how it was portrayed was just very creepy and off-putting, and it's just really off-putting. Honestly, I've watched so much hentai and seen other shows of incest in it that I'm not really bothered by it now. It's just when I first watched it, it was kind of creepy to me. And the whole rape thing, I'm gonna discuss that right now, and I'm not going to take the piss out of rape victims because I have a personal beef against rapists for various reasons. But anyway, I don't dislike the idea that rape was in it, I think, because I think that's an interesting topic to talk about, you know, because usually in the news you hear about, you know, the male rapist who forced himself onto a girl. Well, now it's the opposite. It's a female. I thought it was interesting that it was like the opposite thing, you know, she raped him instead. But how they portrayed that whole drama and how they explored it was kind of childish. Pretty much what happens that during Nao's route, because she's the chick who raped the main protagonist, pretty much what happens is that she feels bad for raping the main character and thought she traumatized him, and she's getting all worked up about this shit, even though it seems like he doesn't really care. Because pretty much what happens is that her parents were arguing, and she pretty much kind of just, I think he was like 13 or 14 at the time, and she pretty much just rushed on top of him and rid him hard. And then afterwards, he's just kind of stone-faced and kind of paralyzed from it. And basically, she thought she ruined him and traumatized him. Like, basically, it's like, oh my god, I'm traumatized by raping you. And then we come to find out during their route and them kind of getting into a relationship together that the main character doesn't really care. Like he's not really bothered by it. I mean, he's kind of shocked that that happened, but he just moved on. He's like, yeah, you kind of raped, because... He's like, yeah, technically it was rape, but I don't really care. And let's be completely honest here. If you're like 13 and 14 and some hot girl with big tits just comes up and suddenly rides you like no tomorrow, I don't think you're really going to bother by the fact that you gave consent. Because it's not like he had like a consent form. You're like, yeah, sure, ride me like there's no tomorrow, lady. But I will say that it does handle itself with some slight maturity to it, so I'll give it a pass, even though how they kind of, it just kind of dives into semantics at times, I think. Now, I'm going to say, like, my one positive of the show is that the show was slightly interesting, like the rape and the incest. I think they were slightly interesting, and it's nothing that isn't really talked much about in anime. And even though they don't go the full impact, even though they don't go all the way with set ideas, I appreciate that those set ideas were in the show. I'm going to talk about the negatives. And one downside I have to the type of narrative style that Yosuga no Sora uses is that the routes themselves are very rushed. So if you want to see the same story but slower, you should probably play the game, because the game probably has better pacing, and also for the sex scenes, because man, they look good. But anyway, and also the fact is that the pacing for the anime routes, they went so fast that it doesn't really leave much of an impact. And even though they were rushed, it wouldn't really help, because the show is kind of generic in how it tells its story. And it basically falls for it falls for the trappings of being a visual novel adaptation. That's like one of the biggest downsides of it. That's one of the biggest downsides. It falls for that trap. Yeah, so from what I've just told you, you can see why this is kind of controversial. But let's just move on to a less controversial subject, the characters. The main character, Haruka, is pretty much generic. I mean, there's not much of a personality I can pick up from him. Now, one thing that was different about him, and he makes some very, very questionable choices, which made him a little interesting to watch. watch because, i.e., he fucked his twin sister and pursued a sexual and emotional relationship with her. And I'm not here to judge, but I personally wouldn't recommend that you go out and fuck your relatives. There's a fan game or some sort of side story game that like progresses beyond what the anime and the original game covered, and apparently Sora are basically living together with child on the way. So twincest creates inborn a mutant abomination. Fucking goddamn. But anyway, enough about the main character and his questionable choices. Time to move on to the side characters. The side characters are pretty much one note, but they do add a little bit of depth, I guess, to each of the characters, but overall it doesn't really work because of how rushed and generic the storylines were mostly. Also, this is a harem story that I am talking about, and all the characters fit to a certain fetish types. But to be fair, the characters were going to be one note anyway. I mean, how far can you push a girl who's like incredibly quiet and likes to play the violin, or the girl who's like extremely airheaded and extremely ditzy, who in the Omiya make looks creepy as fuck? I mean, the girls themselves are alright, and they like I said before, they do try to add a little bit of depth to them, but it doesn't really work because they're very copy and paste. I mean, these are characters I've seen before in other anime, done even better and fleshed out even better. And actually, now I think about it, I'm pretty sure like this show would have been better if it was like a few more episodes. Like they could have added some filler or stuff just to flesh out the characters a little bit more. But as it is, the characters are just kind of one note and boring and not really interesting. But I'm gonna say the two characters I did like was Now and Anasume, I think her name is. And I like Anasume because she's just so adorable, and she's also a shrine maiden. And Now because, well, you can figure it out for yourself. Time to talk now, since I've done off my rant and rave about the characters. Time for the Again, the animation is pretty average and very by the books. There's nothing really good or bad about it as a whole. It uses a very bright color scheme of goes with the summer, the summer kind theme and the kind of the setting the show takes place into. It doesn't have a clear-cut style to it. The character designs are generic and kind of sexualized, but hey, why am I complaining? They look goddamn good, and I wish the show was a hentai so I could fully enjoy myself. But anyway, time to move on to the sound. I don't really care about the opening, and I don't really care about the ending song. The OST does fit the show to a bit, and it has an alright OST, but I don't really care about it. The OST was composed by Madbu Miwa, who has done the OST for Little and Nyayan Koi. The acting was okay, nothing too amazing, but they did a decent job. The show only has a sub because of the nature of the show, because I doubt they would ever dub this kind of show, especially when people are making like, harder, haraka, harder. But as far as like sub goes, it's not that bad. So time to move on to enjoyment. So what I liked about the show is that it was trying to be a little different, which isn't bad. And another thing is I actually like that the show follows the source material to a point. Plus I also enjoyed the fact that these relationships went all the way, and that's something we don't get to see much, especially for a show that aired on public television. Like, oh my god, just imagine the reaction when people were watching this on public television. It was pretty much uncensored too. Like, obviously you didn't see like the bits and bobs, but you basically saw the action going. You saw the action, just you didn't see the bits. So, I mean, that would have been pretty surprising for people who are watching this for the first time on Japanese television. It's like, oh, it's their favorite game. Oh, they're probably not going to do the sex scenes. And then they see it, it's like, oh boy. So I think, overall, Yosuga no Sora is pretty much one of those animes where if you like it, you're going to like it. And if you hate it, you probably want to destroy every trace of it off from this world, hoping it never sees the day of light again. Because I understand that rape and incest is a very touchy subject, especially for most people. I personally am not bothered because I'm very impartial. But yeah, Yosuga no Sora, incest, rape, hot ladies, generic protagonist, pick your poison. This is Bio Gundam signing off, and thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this review. This is Bio Gundam.